Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Nights. This is Kevin, and tonight we have a cozy collection of Christmas stories. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave the lustre of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eye should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys and Saint Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. Bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples how merry, his cheeks like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside on his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew, like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." "If you want to write to Santa Claus, write to him," said Mrs. Sebastian. "There's a writing pad and pencil in the drawer." "I will then," said Peedie Billy. "All I want is a horse." Annie, his sister, who was 12, sniggered, putting on her coat and scarf. "Oh, leave the boy alone," said Mrs. Sebastian, quite severely. Annie, still laughing, went outside among the first stars and snowflakes. Billy, aged 8, sat under the paraffin lamp, and it took him as long to compose the Christmas letter as it might have taken the gravestone maker to cut an inscription. His mother mixed the Christmas pudding. The little croft among the Orkney hills, brimmed with spices and fruits of the Orient. "Dear Santa," wrote Billy, "please can I get a horse for Christmas? Just leave it at the end of the house, as I know it won't be easy for you to put a horse in my stocking. I like horses more than anything. Just a horse will do. Never mind fruit or sweeties. Yours, William Sebastian Jr." His mother had made a very rich sphere of the pudding, and was about to wrap it in its clute. The biggest pot in the house was chuckling on top of the stove. "Won't you read the letter to me?" said Mrs. Sebastian, now that Billy had laid aside the blunt pencil, torn the script out of the pad. "Oh no," said Peedie Billy. "Letters is private." Meantime, Annie had come in from the first snowfall, and her eyes were 2 glittering stars, and her cheeks were 2 apples, and she was a galaxy of snow crystals from head to feet. Peedie Billy put his letter to Santa into the fire, and a flame licked it up in an instant. "What way on earth," said Annie, "is Santa going to read a burnt letter?" "Oh, don't torment the boy," said his mother. "Time for your homework." "It doesn't matter anyway," said Annie, "because there's no such person as Santa." Peedie Billy gave his sister a look of wonderment and pity. Then he stood in the open door for a while, looking at the dark hills where he would ride his horse on summer days. Then he yawned and mumbled, good night to his mother and sister and went to bed. Sleep bore him off with slow, sifting mane and gentle hoofbeats. The pudding sang happy songs and thumped in the black pot. There had never been a Christmas morning quite like it in the croft. Peedie Billy had rushed out at first light to welcome his horse, and the field was empty. Nor was there a sign of a horse in byre and barn, or anywhere about the steading. He came indoors, downcast. His sister Annie was in her nightgown, turning the pages of a new book with illustrations called Little Women. Annie was very pleased with her Christmas present. As she turned the pages, she chomped on her Christmas apple and peeled bits of Spanish sunshine from her Christmas orange. Peedie Billy's stocking was loaded too. He pulled out an apple, an orange, and a wooden horse painted bright red with black spots, and it stood on a kind of a platform with a wooden wheel at each corner. Mrs. Sebastian came in from milking the cow upon a disgraceful scene. Peedie Billy had thrown the toy horse against the wall with such force that the wheels had come off, and the head was bashed in. Annie sat in the rocking chair laughing. Peedie Billy, in a passion of tears, threw first his apple and then his orange at his sister. "Oh, what a way to carry on!" cried Mrs. Sebastian. "And on Christmas morning of all days." The rest of the day, however, was happy enough. Neighbours dropped by, and one of them, the blacksmith, gave Peedie Billy a shilling. "A horse," said the blacksmith, when he had drunk his glass of old Orkney. "You'll never want for a horse, boy. I can tell you a good horseman when I see one. You have the very hands of a ploughman, Billy. You'll be a famous horseman some day. You will, laddie." Three neighbour women came in and kissed him under the mistletoe, one after the other, amid a storm of laughter, and they gave him 6pence each. Soon it was dinner time. Peedie Billy enjoyed the goose and tatties, and he ate so much of the pudding that he thought for a while that he would burst. The ginger wine glowed on his tongue with all the magic fires of winter. Annie said not a word all day. She sat curled in the rocking chair, reading Little Women. She was still reading it when her mother lit the lamp in the middle of the afternoon. Peedie Billy wandered outside in the first dark. Maybe Santa was late with his horse. Maybe it would be waiting at the end of the steading for him, cold wanting a mouthful of hay. But there was still no horse under the stars. The night before Hogmanay, the boy sat down writing a letter at the table. Annie was making a rag doll for the poor blind child in the croft house beside the loch. She could be a kind enough girl to people outside of the family. The mother was mixing shortbread in an immense bowl beside the fire. The whole parish, even the WRI woman, said Mrs. Sebastian was the best woman for shortbread they knew. There wouldn't be much of her shortbread left by the 6th of January. Peedie Billy finished the letter and addressed it and put it in the stove and ran outside under the freezing stars. The letter, half scorched, fell through the ribs of the stove and smouldered on the stone floor. Annie fell on it like a gull on a crust of bread. It was addressed to Mr. S. Claus. "Dear Sir," Annie read aloud, "the horse I got for Christmas was not the kind of horse I was thinking about when I wrote to you. I hope you forgive me for the way I treated the wooden horse. Andrew Stout, the joiner, has mended it. Thank you. For same. Sam, the blacksmith, says it takes a long while for a good horse and a good horseman to meet up with each other, so I'll be patient. I'm sorry for calling you an old cheat and a twister on Christmas morning, but I was really mad. Yours faithfully, William Sebastian Jr." Annie could hardly get the last words out. Rolling about among the rags and scissors and spools of thread, shrieking with mirth. I would not have you forget that I am speaking about an incident in the childhood of the most famous horseman in his day, in Orkney, Shetland, and Caithness, William Sebastian Thorstone. He won every ploughing match between the ages of 18 and 40. No man, it was said, drove a purer furrow. Wherever in the northeast there was a sick horse or an intractable horse, William Sebastian was sent for. There was a healing in his look, and in his words, and in his hands. His own horses were splendid animals. There they stood, heraldic against the sunset, or sniffing a storm out in the Atlantic. They tossed their manes, and the thunder of their hoofs echoed from the laird's hole to the fisherman's bothy. The sideboard up at the Thornstone farm was crowded with silver trophies. Visitors who came to call on the elderly master of horses thought it strange to see, among the engraved silver pieces, a toy wooden horse with rickety wheels and only one eye. It said the old man died on the day the first tractor was unloaded from the Aberdeen boat onto the pier at Kirkwall. there was a very severe old lady called Miss Tate, who lived alone with her cat, Tompkins, in a big house at the end of the village. All the village children avoided Miss Tate's house. She was especially severe if they came round on bonfire night, or to collect for charity, though it was well known that Miss Tate was the richest person in the island by far. The tin tea caddies on her mantelpiece, it was said, were stuffed with musty-smelling, moth-eaten 20-pound notes. They put treacle on her doorknob at Halloween, and once they tied an empty tin to the tail of Tompkins the cat. Oh, how enraged Miss Tate was. She phoned the island councillor, the district councillor JP, and the police office in Kirkwall. But nobody could find out who the wicked young scoundrels were who had inflicted such mischief on Miss Tate and Tompkins the cat. Miss Tate found her grandfather's thick hickory stick in the attic and blew the cobwebs off it. "This," said Miss Tate to Tompkins, "is for the next young villain who comes round to this house." And she made a fierce flourish with the stick until it whistled through the cold grey air of the kitchen. Tompkins took one alarmed leap from floor to dresser top. The air was cold because it was mid-December, and Miss Tate had lit no fire since the miners' strike began. The village children practiced their carols to sing here and there about the island 2 nights before Christmas. All the children except Tommy practiced their 5 or 6 chosen carols round the school piano around 4 o'clock. Tommy was not included because he had a voice like a crow, and more than that, whenever the children did anything communally, like a play or a bonfire, Tommy always ruined it with some piece of stupidity or clumsiness. 2 nights before Christmas, the choir, well muffled in bonnets and mittens and scarves, set out in lightly falling snow to sing their carols. How pure and sweet their voices sounded outside the inn. And at the teacher's house, and the man's and the doctor's house, once in Royal David's City, away in a manger, O come all ye faithful. As the choristers went through the falling snow to sing at their last station, the block of new council houses, one of them wondered where Tommy might be. "Oh," said Mary, who had the sweetest voice in the choir, "I saw him down at the store with a sack just at sunset." After they had sung Mary's Boy outside the council houses and got more 5p and 10p pieces so that the collecting box rang like a bell, Willie, who was game for anything, said, "Let's go and see what kind of a Christmas Miss Tate is having." Well, that caused a fluttering among the girls. They had heard about Miss Tate's stick and how she meant to thwack boys and girls who came about her doors. "It'll be miserable in there," said Sandra. "No Christmas tree, no decorations, not even a fire." But, greatly daring, softly through the snow they stepped to Miss Tate's window and peeked through. They nearly fell on top of each other in astonishment. For who was sitting in Miss Tate's armchair eating an apple, but Tommy the outcast. And there was a fire of wood in the grate, burning bright. And there was a sack of wood sure gathered on the floor. And every now and then, Tommy threw a piece of a fish box onto the flames. The bowl on the sideboard was heaped with apples, grapes, oranges, bananas, and nuts. Miss Tate looked very happy sitting in her rocker. But suddenly, she was aware of the faces at the window. She made towards the door, and the silent choristers, clustered outside the window, fled. The girls shrieked, Mary slipped in the snow and cried in terror. "Come back," cried Miss Tate from the open door. As if it was, her voice glowed like a candle and trembled like a bell through the falling snow. "I have a new pound coin for each of you." The choristers returned one by one with smoking breaths. They stood outside Miss Tate's open door. They sang "We Three Kings of Orient Are." Then one by one, they came in and stood by the fire. "Tommy brought me driftwood," said Miss Tate. "Now who likes oranges?" Tompkins purred merrily beside the blaze. There was one light in the village on Christmas Eve. It came from Jock Scabra's cottage, and he was the awkwardest old man that had ever lived in our village or in the island or in the whole of Orkney. I was feeling very wretched and very ill-natured myself that evening. My Auntie Belle had just been explaining to me after tea that Santa Claus, if he did exist, was a spirit that moved people's hearts to generosity and goodwill, no more or less. Gone was my fat, apple-cheeked, red-coated friend of the past 10 winters. Scattered were the reindeer, broken the sledge that had beaten such a marvellous path through the constellations, and the merry dancers, while all the children of Orkney slept. Those merry, perilous descents down the Lum, Yule Eve by Yule Eve, with the sack of toys and books, games and chocolate boxes, had never really taken place at all. I looked over towards our hearth after my aunt had finished speaking. The magic had left it. It was only a place of peat flames and peat smoke. I can't tell you how angry I was the more I thought about it. How deceitful, how cruel grown-ups were. They had exiled my dear old friend Santa Claus to eternal oblivion. The gifts I would find in my stocking next morning would have issued from Auntie Belle's spirit of generosity. It was not the same thing at all. Most of the year I saw little enough of that spirit of generosity. At Halloween, for example, She had boxed my ears till I saw stars that had never been in the sky for stealing a few apples and nuts out of the cupboard before dooking time. If there was a more ill-tempered person than my Auntie Bell in the village, it was, as I said, old Jock Scabra, the fisherman with a silver ring in his ear and a fierce one-eyed tomcat. His house, alone in the village, was lit that night. I saw it from our front door at 11 o'clock. Auntie Bell's piece of common sense had so angered me that I was in a state of rebellion and recklessness. No, I would not sleep. I would not even stay in a house from which Santa had been banished. I felt utterly betrayed and bereaved. When, about 10:30, I heard rending snores coming from Auntie Bell's bedroom, I got out of bed stealthily and put my cold clothes on and unlatched the front door and went outside. The whole house had betrayed me. Well, I intended to be out of the treacherous place when the magic hour of midnight struck. The road through the village was deep in snow, dark except where, under old Scabra's window, the lamplight had stained it an orange color. The snow shadows were blue under his walls. The stars were like sharp snails, and even though I had wrapped my scarf twice round my neck, I shivered in the bitter night. Where could I go? The light in the old villain's window was entrancing. I fluttered towards it like a moth. How would such a sour old creature be celebrating Christmas Eve? Thinking black thoughts beside his embers, stroking his one-eyed cat. The snow crashed like thin, fragile glass under my feet. I stood at last outside the fisherman's window. I looked in. What I saw was astonishing beyond ghosts or trolls. There was no crotchety old man inside. No one-eyed cat, no ingrained filth and hung cobwebs. The paraffin lamp threw a circle of soft light, and all that was gathered inside that radiance was clean and pristine. The cups and plates on the dresser, the clock and ship in the bottle and tea caddies on the mantelpiece, the framed picture of Queen Victoria on the wall, the blue stones of the floor, the wood and straw of the fireside chair, the patchwork quilt on the bed. A boy I had never seen before was sitting at the table. He might have been about my own age, and his head was a mass of bronze ringlets. On the table in front of him were an apple, an orange, a little sailing ship, crudely cut from wood, with linen sails probably cut from an old t-shirt. The boy, whoever he was, considered those objects with the utmost gravity. Once he put out his finger and touched the hull of the toy ship, as if it was so precious it had to be treated with special delicacy, lest it broke like a soap bubble. I couldn't see the boy's face, only his bright hair, his lissom neck, and the gravity and joy that informed all his gestures. These were his meager Christmas presents. Silently, he rejoiced in them. Beyond the circle of lamplight were the other dwellers in the house. There may have been hidden breath in the darkened box bed in the corner. I don't know how long I stood in the bitter night outside. My hands were trembling. I looked down at them. They were blue with cold. Then suddenly, for a second, the boy inside the house turned to face the window. Perhaps he had heard the tiny splinterings of snow under my boots, or my quickened heartbeats. The face that looked at me was Jock Scabra's, but Jock Scabra's from far back at the pure source of his life, 60 winters ago, before the ring was in his ear, before bad temper and perversity had grained black lines and furrows into his face. It was as if a cloth had been taken to a tarnished, web-clogged mirror. The boy turned back, smiling, to his Christmas hoard. I turned and went home. I lifted the latch quietly, not to awaken Auntie Bell, for if she knew what I had been up to that midnight, there would have been little of her spirit of generosity for me. I crept, trembling, into bed. When I woke up on Christmas morning, the spirit of the season had loaded my stocking, and the chair beside the bed with boxes of sweets, a Guinness Book of Records, a digital watch, a game of Space Wars, a cowboy hat, and a 50-pence piece. Auntie Bell stood at my bedroom door smiling. "And a Merry Christmas," she said. Breakfast over, I couldn't wait to get back to the Scabra house. The village was taken over by children with apples, snowballs, laughter as bright as bells. I peered in at the window. All was as it had been. The piratical old man sluiced the last of his breakfast tea down his throat from a cracked saucer. he fell to picking his black and yellow teeth with a kipper bone. His house was like a mitten. The one-eyed cat yawned wickedly beside the new flames in the hearth. Rolf Scroogeson was the meanest man in Orkney. If somebody sent him a Christmas card, he would say, "Bah," and throw it in the fire. Then he would quickly retrieve it, all scorched and smoky as it was, for it might come handy to write a note on. His fire was two peats that licked each other half-heartedly with small red tongues. That fire would not have kept a cat warm. A Peedie boy stood in the snow and called, "A Merry Christmas, Mr. Scroogeson, when it comes." Rolf Scroogeson put such a blue, cold look on the boy that it might have stricken him on the spot. Rolf Scroogeson put such a cold look upon the boy that it might have stricken him on the spot there and then. But the boy ran, red-cheeked, through the fields to share his winter merriment with farms and crofts near and far. Rolf Scroogeson looked into his wretchedly bare cupboard, and he saw that he had only a crust left and half a spoon of tea and no sugar. Grumbling about the expense of everything, he set out in the late afternoon to the village shop. It was Christmas Eve. He saw a snowman in a field, smoking a cold pipe upside down. Rolf was so mean, he stole the pipe from the snowman's mouth and put it in his pocket. "Merry Christmas," said Bellamure, who kept the village shop. "Your goods get dearer and dearer," was all the reply she got, plus a barbed look. A blizzard came on as Mr. Scroogeson walked home with his few errands. The snow came thicker and faster. It whirled round and round. A dense ravelment and confused Rolf Scroogeson entirely. At last, he saw a wall and a spectral building, and was glad, because the drifting snow had half choked him. He would shelter here till the storm passed. He went through a gate. He discovered to his surprise that he was in the kirkyard. He crouched down behind a stone. The blizzard lasted a long time. Also, the darkness was coming down. Rolf snoozed for a time. Then, when he woke up, the snowstorm had passed. The moon shone on the white heaped kirkyard. The moon lay bright on the tombstone in front of Rolf Scroogeson. He read, Rolf Scroogeson, on the cracked, neglected face of the stone. We all know the rest of the story. How he went home and opened the kist under his bed and brought out heaps of mouldy 10-pound notes and little tarnished tinkling rivers of sovereigns, and how he distributed that hoard to all the poor and infirm of the island, and how he greeted the red-faced Peedie boy next morning and gave him 50p, so that in utter surprise the Peedie boy fell into a snowdrift. And how Rolf passed away at last, a merry old man, full of years and friendship, and lies in the summertime kirkyard. Snow had been falling since dawn, soft and steady, turning the whole forest white. By evening the trees looked as if they had been dipped in icing sugar, and the air carried that deep, quiet stillness that only comes in December. On that chilly night, a fox and a wolf walked together along the frozen shoreline, noses low, hoping to find something, anything, left behind by the winter storms. Under a ridge of drifted snow, the wolf spotted a small wooden keg. He scraped away the frost, cracked it open, and both of them stared in wonder. Butter. Real butter. Creamy, rich, thick enough to warm a belly, even in midwinter. "It's a Christmas blessing," said the fox. "We should hide it and share it tomorrow, properly, fairly, like friends." The wolf, ever trusting, agreed at once. They buried the keg beneath a blanket of snow and walked home with a kind of hopeful excitement that only December brings. Before sunrise, while lantern windows still glowed dimly across the forest, the fox slipped out quietly. "I'll just make sure the snow hasn't covered it too deeply," he whispered. But when he reached the keg, he dug it up and scooped out a little taste. Then another, then just one more. He buried again neatly and padded home. When he returned, the wolf asked where he'd been. "Oh," said the fox, brushing frost from his fur, "I was invited to a christening by the meadow folk. It was a lovely gathering, very festive." The wolf didn't question it. Christmas was full of odd traditions and invitations. The second morning, again, the fox crept out, while the forest still slept under its white blanket. This time, he ate half of what remained, too good to resist on a cold morning. When he came home, the wolf asked, "Another christening?" "Oh, yes," said the fox, shaking snowflakes from his ears. "The baby was given an unusual name, half and half. Strange, but who am I to judge?" The wolf nodded, puzzled by the name, but trusting as ever. In the third morning, by now, the fox dreamed of that last bit of butter all night long. He hurried to the shoreline, dug up the keg, and finished the lot. Then he cleaned inside with his paw until it gleamed. When the wolf asked how the christening was this time, the fox smiled smugly. "Oh, delightful. The baby's name was Lick It Clean. Very modern." The wolf's brow wrinkled. Lick It Clean. What an odd name for a child. The fox just shrugged, as if December always brought strange stories. On the fourth morning, the fox said, "Shall we fetch our butter today? I was thinking of having it with warm bread. Christmas breakfast, you know." The wolf's tail wagged. "Yes, let's get it." They walked through the crisp morning, snow crunching under their paws. Candlelight still glowed in the faraway cottage windows. The air smelled faintly of pine and chimney smoke. The wolf dug eagerly, and then gasped. The keg was empty, completely empty. "Well, you must have come here without me," the fox said, widening his eyes in mock horror. "What? I didn't," cried the wolf. "Well, I've been home every moment." But the fox was already circling him, sniffing dramatically. "Well," he said gravely, "someone ate the butter. And I notice you've been licking your lips an awful lot lately." "That's because it's freezing," the wolf protested. Said the fox. "Hold still, let me check properly." The wolf, gentle-hearted, soft and trusting, stood perfectly still. The fox leaned close as if examining him, then slyly brushed a little smear of butter onto the wolf's mouth from what he'd saved on the fur of his paw. "There," the fox announced triumphantly. "Butter on your muzzle. I knew it. You didn't wait for Christmas morning at all." The wolf touched his mouth, horrified. I swear I didn't eat it." But the fox just shook his head with theatrical disappointment. "Next time," he said, "we stick to my idea of portioning things properly." Every Christmas season has one fox, the one who sneaks the mince pies, drains the Baileys or empties the butter dish, and then somehow manages to blame the most honest person in the room. So keep an eye on the charming, clever ones who insist they're doing everything fairly. They might just be warming themselves on your winter treats. When the heathen raged through the forests of the ancient Northland, there grew a giant tree, branching with huge limbs toward the clouds. It was the thunder oak of the war god Thor. Thither, under cover of night, heathen priests were wont to bring their victims, both men and beasts, and slay them upon the altar of the thunder god. There, in the darkness, was wrought many an evil deed, while human blood was poured forth and watered the roots of that gloomy tree, from whose branches depended the mistletoe, the faithful plant that sprang from the blood-fed veins of the oak. So gloomy and terror-ridden was the spot on which grew the tree that no beasts of field or forest would lodge beneath its dark branches. Nor birds would nest or perch among its gnarled limbs. Long, long ago, on a white Christmas Eve, Thor's priests held their winter rites beneath the thunder oak. Through the deep snow of the dense forest hastened throngs of heathen folk, all intent on keeping the mystic feast of the mighty Thor. In the hush of the night, the folk gathered in the glade where stood the tree. Closely they pressed around the great altar stone under the overhanging boughs, where stood the white-robed priests. Clearly shone the moonlight on all. Then from the altar flashed upward the sacrificial flames, casting their lurid glow on the straining faces of the human victims, awaiting the blow of the priest's knife. But the knife never fell, for from the silent avenues of the dark forest came the good Saint Winfrid and his people. Swiftly the saint drew from his girdle a shining axe. Fiercely he smote the thunder oak, hewing a deep gash in its trunk. And while the heathen folk gazed in horror and wonder, the bright blade of the axe circled faster and faster around St. Winfrid's head, and the flakes of wood flew far and wide from the deepening cut in the body of the tree. Suddenly, there was heard overhead the sound of a mighty, rushing wind. A whirling blast struck the tree. It gripped the oak from its foundations. Backward it fell like a tower, groaning as it split into 4 pieces. But just behind it, unharmed by the ruin, stood a young fir tree, pointing its green spire to heaven. St. Winfrid dropped his axe, turned to speak to the people. Joyously his voice rang out through the crisp winter air. This little tree, a young child of the forest, shall be your holy tree tonight. It is the tree of peace, for your houses are built of fir. It is the sign of endless life, for its leaves are forever green. See how it points upward to heaven. Let this be called the tree of the Christ child. Gather about it, not in the wildwood, but in your homes. There it will shelter no deeds of blood, but loving gifts and rites of kindness. So shall the peace of the white Christ reign in your hearts. And with songs of joy the multitude of heathen folk took up the little fir tree and bore it to the house of their chief. And there, with goodwill and peace, they kept the holy Christmas tide. Most terribly cold it was. It snowed, and was nearly quite dark. And evening, the last evening of the year. In this cold and darkness, there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home, she had slippers on, it is true, but what was the good of that? They were very large slippers, which her mother had hitherto worn. So large were they, and the poor little thing lost them as she scuffled away across the street. Because of two carriages that rolled by dreadfully fast. One slipper was nowhere to be found. The other had been laid hold of by an urchin, and off he ran with it. He thought it would do capitally for a cradle when he some day or other should have children himself. So the little maiden walked on with her tiny naked feet that were quite red and blue from the cold. She carried a quantity of matches in an old apron, and she held a bundle of them in her hand. Nobody had bought anything of her the whole livelong day. No one had given her a single farthing. She crept along, trembling with cold and hunger, a very picture of sorrow, the poor little thing. The flakes of snow covered her long, fair hair, which fell in beautiful curls around her neck. But of that, of course, she never once now thought. From all the windows the candles were gleaming, and it smelt so deliciously of roast goose. For you know it was New Year's Eve. Yes, of that she thought. In a corner, formed by two houses, of which one advanced more than the other, she seated herself down and cowered together. Her little feet she had drawn close up to her, but she grew colder and colder, and to go home she did not venture, for she had not sold any matches, and could not bring a farthing of money. From her father she would certainly get blows, and at home it was cold too, for above her she had only the roof, through which the wind whistled, even though the largest cracks were stopped up with straw and rags. Her little hands were almost numbed with cold. Oh, a match might afford her a world of comfort. If only she dared take a single one out of the bundle, draw it against the wall, and warm her fingers by it. She drew one out. Wresht! How it blazed! How it burnt! It was a warm, bright flame like a candle. As she held her hands over it, it was a wonderful light. It seemed really to light the little maiden, as though she were sitting before a large iron stove, with burnished brass feet and a brass ornament at the top. The fire burned with such blessed influence. It warmed so delightfully. The little girl had already stretched out her feet to warm them too. But the small flame went out. The stove vanished. She had only the remains of the burnt-out match in her hand. She rubbed another against the wall. It burned brightly, and where the light fell on the wall, there the wall became transparent like a veil, so that she could see into the room. On the table was a spread of snow-white tablecloth. Upon it was a splendid porcelain service, and the roast goose was steaming famously with its stuffing of apple and dried plums. And what was still more capital to behold was the goose hopped down from the dish, reeled about on the floor with knife and fork in its breast, till it came up to the poor little girl. When the match went out, and nothing but the thick, cold, damp wall was left behind. She lighted another match. Now, there she was sitting under the most magnificent Christmas tree. It was still larger and more decorated than the one which she had seen through the glass door in the rich merchant's house. Thousands of lights were burning on the green branches, and gaily coloured pictures, such as she had seen in the shop windows, looked down upon her. The little maiden stretched out her hands towards them when the match went out. The lights of the Christmas tree rose higher and higher. She saw them now as stars in heaven. One fell down and formed a long trail of fire. "Someone is just dead," said the little girl. For her old grandmother, the only person who had ever loved her, and who was now no more, had told her that when a star falls, a soul ascends to God. She drew another match against the wall. It was again light, and in the lustre there stood the old grandmother, so bright and radiant, so mild, and with such an expression of love. "Grandmother," cried the little one, "oh, take me with you. You go away when the match burns out. You vanish like the warm stove, like the delicious roast goose and the magnificent Christmas tree." and she rubbed the whole bundle of matches quickly against the wall, for she wanted to be quite sure of keeping her grandmother near her. And the matches gave such a brilliant light that it was brighter than at noonday. Never formerly had the grandmother been so beautiful and so tall. She took the little maiden on her arm, and both flew in brightness and in joy so high, so very high. And then, above, was neither cold, nor hunger, nor anxiety. They were with God. But in the corner, at the cold hour of dawn, sat the poor girl, with rosy cheeks, with a smiling mouth, leaning against the wall, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. Stiff and stark sat the child there with her matches, of which one bundle had been burnt. She wanted to warm herself, people said. No one had the slightest suspicion of what beautiful things she had seen. No one even dreamed of the splendor in which, with her grandmother, she had entered on the joys of a new year. There was once, on a time, a little girl whose father and mother were dead, and she was so poor that she no longer had any little room to live in, or bed to sleep in, and at last she had nothing else but the clothes she was wearing, and a little bit of bread in her hand, which some charitable soul had given her. She was, however, good and pious. And as she was thus forsaken by all the world, she went forth into the open country, trusting in the good God. Then a poor man met her, who said, "Ah, give me something to eat. I am so hungry." She reached into her pocket and gave him a whole piece of bread, and said, "May God bless it to thy use," and went onwards. Then came a child who moaned and said, "My head is so cold. Give me something to cover it with." So she took off her hood and gave it to him. And when she walked a little further, she met another child who had no jacket and was frozen with cold. Then she gave it her own, and a little farther on, one begged for a frock, and she gave away that also. At length, she got into a forest, and it had already become dark. And there came yet another child, and asked for a little shirt. And the good little girl thought to herself, "It is a dark night, and no one sees thee. Thou canst very well give thy little shirt away," and took it off, and gave away that also. And as she so stood, and had not one single thing left, suddenly some stars from heaven fell down, and they were nothing else but hard, smooth pieces of money, and although she had just given her little shirt away, she had a new one, which was of the very finest linen. Then she gathered together the money into this, and was rich all the days of her life. A snowman once stood upon a hill, with his face towards the sunset. A very fine snowman he was, as tall as a soldier and much fatter. He had 2 pieces of glass for eyes, and a stone for a nose, and a piece of black wood for a mouth. And in his hand he held a stout, knobbly club. But he had no clothes at all, not even a hat, and the wind on the top of that hill was as bitter as wind could be. "How cold I am! I am cold as ice," said the snowman. "But that red sky looks so warm." So he lifted his feet from the ground and went tramp, tramp, tramping down the slope towards the setting sun. Very soon he overtook a gypsy woman who was wearing a bright red shawl. "Huh? That looks warm. I must have it," thought the snowman. So he went up to the gypsy woman and he said, "Give me that red shawl." "No, indeed, I cannot spare it on this wintry day," answered the gypsy. "I am cold enough as it is." "Cold?" shouted the snowman. "Are you as cold as I am, I wonder? Are you cold inside as well as outside? Are you made of ice through and through and through?" "No, I suppose not," mumbled the gypsy, who was getting hot with fright. "Then give me your red shawl this very moment, or I shall strike you with my stout knobbly club." And so then the gypsy woman took off her red shawl, grumbling all the time, and gave it to the snowman. He put it round his shoulders without a word of thanks, and went tramp, tramp, tramping down the hill. And the shivering gypsy followed him. Presently, the snowman overtook a ploughboy who was wearing his grandmother's long red woolen mittens. "Ah, they look warm. I must have them," thought the snowman. So he went up to the ploughboy and he said, "Give me those red woolen mittens." "No, indeed," said the ploughboy. They belonged to my grandmother, so she lent them to me because my fingers were so cold." "Cold?" shouted the snowman in a very roarish voice. "Are your fingers as cold as mine, I wonder? Are your hands and arms frozen into ice? Through and through and through?" "No, I suppose not," mumbled the ploughboy. "Then give me those red mittens this moment, or I shall strike you with my stout knobbly club." So the ploughboy drew off the warm mittens, grumbling all the time, and the snowman put them on, without a word of thanks. Then he went tramp, tramp, tramping down the hill, and the gypsy and the ploughboy followed him. After a while, he overtook a tame pirate, wearing a pirate's thick red cap with a tassel dangling down his back. "Huh? That looks warm. I must have it," said the snowman. So he went up to the tame pirate, and he said, "Pirate, give me that red tassel cap." "No, indeed," said the pirate. "An ice cold in the head I should get if I did." "Cold in the head?" shouted the snowman. "Is your head as cold as mine, I wonder? Are your brains made of snow, and your bones solid ice? Through and through and through?" "No, I suppose not," muttered the tame pirate. "Then give me that red tassel cap this moment, or I shall set upon you with my stout knobbly club." Now, the pirate felt very sorry that he had turned tame, but he did not like the look of that knobbly stick. So he gave up his red tassel cap. The snowman put it on without a word of thanks. Then he went tramp, tramp, tramping down the hill, with the red tassel bumping up and down. And the gypsy woman and the ploughboy and the tame pirate followed him. At last, he reached the bottom of the hill, where the village schoolhouse stood, and there was the village schoolmaster on the doorstep, looking at the sunset. He was smoking a glowing briar pipe, and on his feet were 2 red velvet slippers. "Oh, those look warm. I must have them," said the snowman. So he went up to the schoolmaster and he said, "Give me those red slippers." "Certainly, if you want them," said the schoolmaster. "Take them by all means. It is far too cold today to be tramping about with bare toes." And he stopped and drew off his slippers, and there he stood in some bright red socks, thick and woolly and knitted by hand. "Oh, those look warm. Give them to me," said the snowman. "Certainly, if you want them," said the schoolmaster. "But you must come inside. I cannot take my socks off here, in the doorway. Come on to the mat." So the snowman stepped inside the doorway and stood upon the mat. "Be sharp with those socks. My feet are cold as solid ice," he grumbled. "Oh, I am sorry to hear that," said the schoolmaster, "but I have a warm red blanket airing over the stove. Come in, sir. Sit on that chair by the fire, sir. Put your cold feet upon this snug red footstool and let me wrap this red blanket around your legs." So the snowman came into the schoolhouse and sat upon a chair by the glowing fire and put his feet upon the red footstool. And the schoolmaster wrapped the red blanket round, round his legs. And all this while the gypsy woman and the ploughboy and the tame pirate were peering in through the window. "Are you feeling warmer?" asked the schoolmaster. "No, I am as cold as an iceberg." "Then come closer to the fire." So the schoolmaster pushed the chair closer to the fire, but the snowman gave him not one word of thanks. "Are you feeling warmer now?" "No, I am cold as stone. My feet feel like icy water." "Move closer to the fire," said the schoolmaster. And he pushed the chair right against the curb. "There. Are you warmer now?" No, I am colder than ever. I cannot feel my feet at all. I cannot feel my legs at all. I cannot feel my back at all." Then the schoolmaster pushed the chair quite close up against the stove. "Are you warmer now?" he said. But there was no answer, except a slithery sliding sound and the drip, drip, drip of black snow water. "Dear me," whispered the snowman in a gurgling voice. "I have dropped my stout knobbly club. My red slippers are floating into the ash pan. My mittens are swimming in a little river on the floor. My shawl is gone. My red tassel cap is slipping away. My head is going. Splosh, splash, gurgle. That's the end of him, said the schoolmaster, and he went to fetch the mop. Then the gypsy woman and the ploughboy and the tame pirate came in, picked up their things, wrung them out and dried them at the stove, and the schoolmaster put his red slippers on the hearth and hung the red blanket over the back of the chair. Then he picked up the stout, knobbly club and gave the fire a poke. There once lived an old man with his second wife, and they each had a daughter. The wife pampered her own daughter, who was lazy and bad-tempered, but she was unkind to her stepdaughter. The old man's daughter had to rise before daybreak to tend the cattle, fetch the firewood, light the stove, and sweep the floor. Yet her stepmother found fault with all she did and grumbled at her the whole day through. Even the wildest wind grows calm with time. But there was no quieting this old woman once she was roused. She would not be content until she had driven the poor girl from the house. "Get rid of her, old man," she said one day to her husband. "I cannot bear the sight of her any longer. Drive her into the forest and leave her in the snow." The old man pleaded, but the wife always had her way. So, one bitterly cold morning, he harnessed his horses to the sledge and called his daughter. "Come, my child. We are going for a ride. Climb into the sledge." The sledge raced over the crisp snow into the forest until it came to a lofty fir tree. There, the old man stopped and left the luckless girl trembling by a deep snowdrift. He drove home with a heavy heart, certain he would never see his daughter again. It was very cold, and the girl sat beneath the hoary fir tree, shivering. When all of a sudden, she caught her breath, for she could hear a cracking and snapping of twigs, and she knew Grandfather Frost was leaping through the trees. In a twinkling, he was in the topmost branches of the very tree by which she sat. "Are you warm, my pretty one?" he called. "Yes, quite warm, thank you, Grandfather Frost," she answered. He came down lower, and the cracking and snapping grew louder than ever. "Are you warm?" he called again. "Are you snug, my pretty one?" The girl was scarcely able to catch her breath, but she said, "Yes, I'm quite warm, thank you, Grandfather Frost." He then climbed lower still, cracking and snapping the frosty boughs very loudly indeed. "Are you warm?" he asked. "Are you snug, my pretty one? Are you cozy, my sweet snow child?" The girl was growing numb and could hardly move her tongue, but she still managed to whisper, "I'm quite warm, thank you, Grandfather Frost." Then Grandfather Frost took pity on the girl and wrapped her in his fluffy furs. Meanwhile, the wicked stepmother was frying pancakes and preparing for the funeral repast. She said to her husband, "Go to the forest, old fool, and bring your daughter back to be buried." The old man harnessed the horses and obediently went into the forest. And there he found his daughter on the very spot where he had left her. She was alive. She was well, wrapped in a warm sable coat over a glittering velvet gown. Beside her stood a large chest stuffed with furs and rare gems. The old man was overjoyed. He seated his daughter in the sledge, put the chest in beside her, and drove home. Back in the house, the old woman was still frying pancakes when suddenly her little dog began to bark. Ruff, ruff. The old man's daughter comes rich and fair. A wondrous fortune she found there. The old woman threw the dog a pancake and said, "You are wrong, dog. You should say the old man's daughter is cold and dead. The forest snow lies on her head." The dog munched the pancake, but still barked, "Ruff, ruff. The old man's daughter comes rich and fair. A wondrous fortune found she there." The old woman hurled more pancakes at the dog, and when this did not stop it, she beat it until it ran howling into the snow. Suddenly, there came the sound of the sledge racing into the yard. The door burst open, and in walked the old man's daughter, dazzling in her white furs and precious stones. Behind her walked her happy father, bearing the heavy chest of furs and jewels. The old woman was astonished to see her alive and dressed in such finery. "Harness the horses, old man," she said to her husband. "Take my own daughter to the forest and leave her at the same spot." The old man put the woman's daughter into the sledge, drove her into the forest, and left her by the deep snowdrift under the lofty fir tree. She was soon so cold, her teeth chattered, and her feet grew numb. Presently, Grandfather Frost came leaping through the treetops, cracking and snapping the twigs, and stopped to ask the old woman's daughter, "Are you warm, my pretty one?" "Oh no, I'm terribly cold," she snapped. "Don't pinch and pierce me so." Grandfather Frost came lower, making the branches snap and crack more loudly. "Are you warm?" he called. "Are you snug, my pretty one?" "Oh no, I'm freezing," she snapped back. "Go away, you stupid old man." But Grandfather Frost came down still lower, and the branches cracked and snapped louder than ever, and his breath grew colder and colder. "Are you warm?" he called again. "Are you snug, my pretty one? Are you cozy, my sweet one?" "Oh, no," she cried. "I'm frozen stiff. Go away, you stupid grey beard." Grandfather Frost was so cross that he sent a piercing cold blast through her and turned the old woman's daughter into a block of ice. Day had barely dawned when the old woman said to her husband, "Make haste, and harness the horses, old man. Go and fetch my daughter and bring her back, clad in furs and jewels." When the old man had gone, the little dog began to bark. "Ruff, ruff, the old man's daughter will soon be wed, but the old woman's daughter is cold and dead." The old woman threw the dog a pie and said, "You are wrong, dog. You should say, 'The old woman's daughter comes rich and fair. A wondrous fortune found she there.'" The dog continued its barking. "Ruff, ruff, the old woman's daughter is cold and dead." Before long, she heard the sound of horses' hoofs and rushed out to greet her daughter. But when the old woman turned back the cover on the sledge, she found her daughter frozen stiff. So overcome with grief was she that she died. The old man and his daughter lived on together happily for many, many years, well rid of the cruel old woman and her very lazy daughter.